Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first thing I noticed about the motel wasn't the emptiness. It was the way sound traveled. Out in the desert, noise doesn't get swallowed by trees or buildings. It rides heat and wind, skips across hard ground and lands wherever it wants. A slammed car door carries like a shouted warning. A single raised voice can roll all the way to the highway, bounce off the concrete median, and come back at you like an echo you didn't ask for. That's why the maintenance shack worked. It wasn't the biggest structure on the property, and it wasn't comfortable, but it was solid. Concrete block walls. A metal door meant for janitorial staff and contractors. A narrow footprint that forced you to be organized. It sat behind the main office, past the pool that had turned into a green bowl of stink, right at the edge of the old laundry building where the machines had been stripped or smashed long before the outbreak. I didn't plan to stay at a motel. I didn't plan to stay anywhere. My plan, if you could call it that, was to keep moving west until I hit something that looked like stability. A town that hadn't collapsed, a fire station that still had lights. Anything? But plans died fast once the phones went silent and the radios turned into looping emergency tones. I was a field service technician for commercial air conditioning and refrigeration. Mostly grocery stores, some restaurants, a handful of industrial clients. My van used to be my office. Gauges, recovery cylinder, vacuum pump, spare capacitors, contactors, belts, filters, copper fittings. I spent my life chasing other people's comfort, keeping compressors alive through heat waves, swapping blower motors and ceilings that smelled like fryer oil, fixing walk-in freezers at 2 a.m. so businesses didn't lose inventory. Then the outbreak started in the cities first, or maybe it started everywhere and the cities just made it obvious. By the time I hit the desert corridor, Interstate 10, the long stretch where the world feels like it was built for engines and not for people, the signs were everywhere. Abandoned cars angled wrong on the shoulder. Gas stations with handwritten "no fuel" signs taped to the doors. A border inspection station with cones still set up and nobody in the booths. The kind of silence that doesn't feel natural, like something is holding its breath. I drove until my fuel gauge stopped being a number and started being a countdown. When I saw the motel, it looked like a mirage that had decided to become real. A low complex of single-story units in a U-shape around a courtyard. A faded sign on a tall pole that still had a few working letters. A parking lot with sun-bleached stripes and weeds pushing through cracks. Most important, no people. That last part was the trap, usually. Empty places had stories. They had reasons. I'd learned to look for the reasons first. I drove past once, slow, window down, listening. Nothing. No generator hum, no voices, no dogs. No movement behind curtains. Just wind tapping a loose sheet of aluminum somewhere, and a distant, periodic sound from the highway that might have been a car or might have been nothing. I pulled in anyway because the alternative was running dry in the open. I parked my van behind the main office, angled so I could back out fast. I left the keys in the ignition. I didn't like doing that, but I liked being stuck even less. I took my bag first. Headlamp, water, multi-tool, gloves, a small pry bar, and a compact pump-action 12-gauge shotgun I'd bought years ago for home defense and then mostly ignored. I'd never expected to carry it like a tool the way I carried a crescent wrench. The first infected I saw at the motel was inside a room with the door half open. It wasn't lunging. It wasn't sprinting like the panic videos people had posted early on when they still had enough signal and confidence to film things. It was standing near the bed, swaying, like it couldn't remember what it had been doing. Its clothes were wrong for the heat. Thick hoodie, jeans, sneakers, and its skin had that chalky look people get when they've been outdoors too long without care. The eyes tracked, slow, when I moved. I backed away without making a sound. I eased the door shut with 2 fingers and let it rest without clicking the latch. That was the first rule I'd learned. Don't make a problem bigger than it is. I walked the perimeter of the property. The fence line was half collapsed in places. Chain link bent inward like someone had tried to cut through. The pool gate hung open. The laundry building had a side door kicked in. Behind the units, a service alley ran like a narrow canyon of concrete and sand, littered with old mattresses and broken furniture. The kind of motel debris that accumulates when nobody cares anymore. And at the edge of the property, tucked behind the laundry building, was the maintenance shack. It was about the size of a small bedroom, maybe 10 by 14 feet, with a shallow slanted roof and a single door. A tiny window near the top on one side meant more for light than for looking out. A metal vent on the roof that had once been part of the motel's maintenance air circulation, probably tied into the laundry exhaust system. The door opened inward, which I liked. It meant I could brace it from the inside with something solid and force would work against the hinges. The lock itself was a simple knob lock, but the jamb was metal, and the frame was set into concrete block. Not perfect, but better than a hollow-core motel room door. Inside, it smelled like dust, old detergent, and something faintly chemical. There were shelves along one wall with empty plastic bins, a rusted mop bucket, coils of garden hose, and a pegboard with outlines where tools used to hang. The floor was bare concrete with a drain in the center. A folding chair sat in the corner like someone had taken a break and never returned. I stood still, listening. No movement, no breathing that wasn't mine, no scratching in the walls. I've opened enough access panels in enough buildings to know what rats sound like, what raccoons sound like, what a bird trapped in a vent sounds like. This place was quiet in a way that felt clean. I closed the door behind me and tried the knob from inside. It held. That's when I decided to stay the night. Staying the night became staying 2 nights. 2 nights became something closer to a base, because the desert did what it always does. It made you respect limits. During the day, heat turned the air into a weight. At night, the temperature dropped fast enough that you could feel it in your teeth. Wind picked up like a living thing and pushed grit into everything you owned. Water became currency. Shade became strategy. The motel offered shade in the form of overhangs, breezeways, and the deep shadows behind units where the sun couldn't reach until late morning. It offered structure, walls to block sight lines, corners to hide behind, doors that could be closed without a tent flapping like a flag. It also offered danger because danger always followed shelter. The infected wandered through the parking lot daily. Not in organized packs, not like they had a plan, but like the place still had gravity. They drifted in from the highway and got caught by the geometry of the buildings. They bumped into doors. They lingered by windows. Sometimes they stood under the awnings where the shade cooled them, heads tilted, as if they could still feel relief. They were drawn to noise, to movement, to light at night. They weren't clever, but they were persistent. And persistence is enough to ruin you if you get lazy. I treated the courtyard like a hazard zone. The motel units formed a U, with the open end facing the parking lot and the highway beyond. If anything came in from the road, it would funnel through that open end like water through a channel. So I made my paths behind the units. In the service alley, I moved debris quietly and created a narrow route that let me travel from the maintenance shack to the far end of the complex without stepping into open space. I pulled a broken dresser upright to block a direct line of sight from the parking lot. I dragged a dead palm frond and a torn tarp to create a visual break. It wasn't camouflage in the military sense, but it disrupted the simple see movement, follow movement pattern the infected seemed to have. I also learned the sound map. A loose air conditioner housing on the roof would clatter if the wind shifted. A cracked pool gate would squeal if you pushed it even slightly. A piece of glass in the sand by room 12 would crunch no matter how careful you were. I marked those spots in my head like a mental checklist. My first real job was the roof. The maintenance shack had a slanted roof that looked like it had been patched before. Sun-baked tar paper, old adhesive, and places where the top layer had peeled back like old skin. If it rained, rare, but it happened, water would find its way in. And in the desert, one bad leak can ruin more than comfort. It can ruin your stored food, your bedding, your electronics, and your ability to rest. There were broken air conditioning units behind the laundry building, the outdoor condenser sections ripped open for copper and aluminum. People had scavenged the valuable stuff and left the sheet metal shells behind. Sheet metal doesn't care if it's valuable. It cares if it's in one piece. I used a screwdriver and my pry bar to strip the remaining panels. I wore gloves because edges in that heat are sharp and unforgiving. I carried the panels one at a time back to the shack, moved slowly so I didn't flash movement in the courtyard. I set the sheet metal over the worst sections of roof and anchored it using roofing screws I scavenged from a maintenance cart in the laundry building. Where I didn't have screws, I used bolts and fender washers from a broken vending machine mount. I didn't care how it looked, I cared that it stayed down when the wind hit. At the roof seam, I used foil tape from my own supplies, real metal foil tape, the kind meant for ductwork, not cheap cloth tape. It adhered even in heat if you prepped the surface. I brushed dust away, wiped with a rag dampened from my water bottle, let it flash dry, then pressed tape hard with the back of a spoon. After that, I focused on the windows. The shack had one high window that would be hard for the infected to reach, but not impossible if they piled up or leaned against the wall long enough. I didn't want that glass to be a weak point. I didn't have plywood, but I had furniture. Inside one motel unit, I found a thick particle board desk that had been shoved against the wall. The room smelled like old sweat and stale air, and there were signs someone had camped there. Empty bottles, wrappers, a blanket on the floor, but they were gone, and they'd left the desk. I dismantled it quietly, taking the top panel and a side panel. I carried them back through my hidden path and screwed them over the window frame from inside, leaving a small gap at the top for airflow. In the desert, you don't seal yourself into a box without planning ventilation. Ventilation became my next obsession. The shack's door was solid, but solid doors trap heat. The roof vent offered airflow, but only if the air could move. I rigged a simple chimney effect using that vent and a low intake near the bottom of the door. I drilled 2 small holes near the base of the door, small enough that I could cover them from inside if I needed to, and back them with metal mesh cut from a broken window screen. I secured the mesh with screws and washers so it wouldn't peel off. The roof vent pulled warm air up as heat rose, and cooler air came in low. It wasn't air conditioning, but it kept the shack from turning into an oven. Water was next, always water. The motel had left behind supplies scattered like breadcrumbs. Travelers trapped during the early collapse had panicked, grabbed what they could, and then either fled or got stuck. In one unit, I found a full case of bottled water shoved under a bed. In another, a stack of gallon jugs, some empty, some half full. In the laundry building, a maintenance sink still had a slow drip because the water pressure hadn't completely died yet, or because a tank somewhere upstream was still feeding it. I didn't trust the water, not fully. Out here, water systems can be weird even when the world is normal. A motel might be on municipal water, or it might be on a well, or it might have storage tanks. If pressure drops, contaminants can move backward through pipes. If there's a leak, bacteria can bloom. So I treated everything. I had a small backpacking filter in my kit, the kind with a squeeze bag. I also had household bleach, plain, unscented, from my van. I measured carefully because too much makes water unsafe and too little does nothing. I used drops per gallon, not guesses. I kept a written note on a scrap of cardboard because fatigue makes people forget simple math. I stored water in the cleanest containers I could find, labeled by date with a marker. Old habit from service work, label everything or you'll regret it later. Food was easier but still a puzzle. Canned goods were common. Beans, soup, fruit, meat in tins that felt heavy with salt. I found ramen packets, crackers, peanut butter, trail mix. I found motel breakfast supplies, little jam cups, honey, plastic-wrapped muffins that had become bricks. I sorted everything into categories and stacked it off the floor on a shelf to keep it away from insects. Fuel was the wild card. In the parking lot, there were abandoned cars with fuel in them, but siphoning is a loud, risky job if you do it wrong. I didn't want to be on my knees next to a car in open space while infected wandered close. I also didn't want to set myself on fire by being careless. I found half-empty fuel containers in a back room of the office. 2 red gasoline cans with cracked spouts, 1 yellow diesel can that was empty, and a few plastic jugs that made me nervous. I didn't trust plastic jugs for long-term storage, but I used them short-term for moving fuel. My van ran on gasoline. That mattered. I waited until late evening when the infected tended to drift toward the shaded side of the property. I moved fast and quiet, keeping my head on a swivel. I used a hand siphon pump from my toolkit, one with a bulb and check valves, so I didn't have to use the old hose and mouth method that gets people sick even in normal times. I drained small amounts from multiple vehicles rather than taking everything from one. It was slower, but it reduced the time I spent exposed. I stored fuel in the best containers I had and kept them outside the shack in the shade behind the laundry building, because fumes indoors are a bad way to lose your shelter. My workbench came last because I needed a place to think. I built it out of a motel table and 2 cinder blocks. I anchored the table legs with screws and metal brackets scavenged from bed frames. On top, I laid a sheet of plywood I found behind the office, warped but usable. I arranged tools like I used to. Cutting on one side, fasteners in a tray, electrical parts in a small bin, cleaning supplies separate from food. It wasn't pretty, but it made the shack feel like something other than a hiding place. Then I made the hardest decision. Light discipline. At night, darkness is protection. It's also stress. Humans do badly in full dark for too long, but the infected reacted to light, and so did other people, and other people were sometimes worse. I used a red lens on my headlamp to minimize visible light. I taped over cracks around the doorframe from inside. I hung a towel as a light curtain. If I needed to work, I did it low and slow, never letting a beam flash through a gap. That routine might have held for weeks, maybe longer. I could have become one more ghost in a forgotten place, living on canned food and caution, waiting for the world to settle. But the world didn't settle. It moved, and it found me. It happened on the 5th day, mid-morning, when the sun had already burned off the last of the night cool. I heard engines first, multiple. Not the distant single-car sound on the highway, but the closer, uneven note of vehicles running hard, then easing, then running again. People driving nervous. I climbed onto the shack roof carefully and crawled to the edge where I could see the parking lot without showing my whole body. Through the heat shimmer, I saw them. A small caravan turning off the frontage road and into the motel entrance. 3 vehicles. a white cargo van with a dented side panel, a dark pickup with a camper shell, a small SUV with a roof rack piled with duffel bags and plastic totes, all strapped down with ratchet straps like someone who understood physics had done the tying. They rolled in slow, then faster, then stopped in the courtyard like they thought they'd found an oasis. And then they did the worst thing possible. They got loud. Doors slammed. Someone shouted, not in panic, but in relief. A child cried. A dog barked once, sharp and excited. I could almost feel the sound wave moving outward, reaching the highway like a hand raised to get attention. The infected responded the way they always did. From the far end of the lot, 2 of them turned. From behind room 6, one drifted into view like it had been waiting. From the service alley near the laundry building, something shuffled that I hadn't seen in 2 days. The caravan didn't notice at first. They were focused on the rooms, on the pool, on the idea of shelter. I watched through a crack between sheet metal panels, jaw tight, and felt the familiar fight in my head. Stay locked in the shack. Stay quiet. Let them deal with their own mistakes. Or help and risk making myself visible. Helping wasn't charity, it was math. If they fought in the courtyard, they'd draw more infected. If they got chased, they'd run. Maybe toward my part of the complex, maybe past the maintenance shack, maybe right into the service alley where I'd built my quiet roots. If they panicked and fired guns, the sound would roll out to the highway and bring in anything within earshot. Their mistake could become my problem in minutes. So I didn't think about whether they deserved help. I thought about containment. I slid down from the roof and pulled my small binoculars from my bag. I used them through the door's peephole gap I'd created by loosening one screw and offsetting the towel curtain. I got a clearer look. There were 5 people, maybe 6. 2 men, 2 women, at least 1 teenager, and a kid around 8. The dog was medium-sized, maybe a shepherd mix, tail wagging like it had forgotten the world was broken. One of the women had a medical bag slung over her shoulder. Another wore a reflective vest like she'd come from roadwork or logistics. One of the men had the posture of someone who'd done security work, scanning corners even as he talked. He was the one holding a rifle low, finger off the trigger, not waving it. That detail mattered. The kid ran toward the pool. The woman with the medical bag called after him. Her voice cracked with stress, and that was enough to pull 3 infected closer. They shuffled into the courtyard entrance, slow but steady. Heads angled toward sound, arms loose, feet dragging in the sand. The security-looking man saw them first. He raised his hand and said something to the group, sharp and controlled. The caravan froze, then started backing toward their vehicles. Too late. The infected didn't sprint, but they didn't stop either. And behind them, from the parking lot, more were turning. The sound had reached the highway, and the highway was a feeding line for anything that wandered. I had seconds to choose how to intervene. I didn't want to open the door and run out with a shotgun like some action movie. That kind of movement would make me the loudest thing in the area. It would also invite attention I didn't want. I needed leverage without exposure. I grabbed a small metal wrench from my bench and tapped it against a pipe inside the shack, as lightly as I could while still making a sound. A controlled noise, not a bang, more like a faint metallic ping. The infected closest to the shack paused, heads turning toward the new sound. Not all of them, but enough. Then I did it again, a little farther from the door, to make it seem like the sound source was not directly in the courtyard. 2 infected drifted toward the shack side, away from the caravan, following the new stimulus. It bought time. Time was all I wanted. The caravan started moving with more purpose now, The man with the rifle motioned them toward the office building. The reflective vest woman grabbed the kid by the wrist and pulled him back. The teenager yanked the dog's leash hard enough to stop it from lunging into open space. They made it to the office door. The office door didn't open. It was locked, and they didn't have the key. I watched them struggle with it, too loud, too frantic, hands slipping because panic kills fine motor skills. One of the men slammed his shoulder into the door like it was a bad idea and still did it. More infected drifted into the courtyard entrance. This was tipping from mistake into collapse. I made a decision that felt like swallowing glass. I opened my shack door just enough to slip out, keeping my body behind it. I moved into the service alley, staying low, using the walls as cover. I had a route behind the units that would bring me close to the office side without crossing the courtyard. As I moved, I kept my head turned, listening for the infected. They were close, too close. I could hear the dry scuff of their feet in sand. I reached the corner behind room 8 and peeked around. The caravan was still at the office door. One infected had made it within 15 feet of them, and they were about to do something loud, either shoot or swing something metal. I needed to redirect, not escalate. I pulled a motel room key tag from my pocket, one I'd grabbed days earlier because old habits make you pick up things just in case. It was a plastic tag on a metal ring. I tossed it down the service alley behind me, letting it clatter and skid. The sound wasn't huge, but it was distinct. The infected nearest the caravan turned toward it. Not all, but 2 of them shifted course. They drifted away from the courtyard entrance toward the alley, toward the noise. The caravan leader, the man with the rifle, noticed the shift. He looked around, eyes searching. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I stepped back into shadow and waited. He made the right move. He stopped forcing the office door and guided his group to move, low and quiet, toward the motel units instead. He pointed to a room door. The reflective vest woman moved fast with a keyless entry tool. Actually, no, she didn't have one. She used a flat piece of metal, maybe a putty knife, and jammed it into the jamb. That told me something. They were resourceful, not tourists. The door popped open. They slipped inside. The infected kept drifting, now pulled between old sound and new movement. The alley clatter had faded, but the caravan's whispers and the dog's anxious panting gave them something else. I retreated back toward the shack, moving faster now, because I'd already broken the biggest rule. I'd made myself part of the equation. I got inside and secured the door behind me, bracing it with a steel conduit bar I'd wedged into a bracket. I waited, breathing slow, listening. For a few minutes, there was a tense quiet, the kind where you imagine every possible outcome. Then I heard a knock. Not pounding, not frantic. A careful, controlled knock on metal. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. A signal. I didn't answer. The knock came again, same pattern. Whoever it was, they weren't infected. They weren't random either. Random people don't knock like that when the world is falling apart. I moved to the door, staying behind it. I spoke through the metal, low. Go away. A voice answered, also low, male, calm, but tight around the edges. I'm not here to take your place. We just need to talk. I didn't like that, because it meant he'd already assumed I lived here. You're loud, I said. You brought them. We didn't know, he said. We do now. I waited, because silence makes people fill the space. We have a kid, he added, and a medic. We're not trying to fight you. The word medic snagged in my head. Not because it made me soft, because it changed the math again. People with medical skills were rare even before everything collapsed. Now they were priceless. Still, I didn't open the door. "Back up," I said. "Stand where I can see you." I had a small viewing gap. Not a real peephole, but a sliver where the door seal wasn't perfect. I shifted the towel curtain and saw him step back into partial view. He was mid-30s, sunburned, dust on his clothes. He wore a plain, long-sleeve shirt, sleeves rolled up, work pants, sturdy boots. The rifle was slung, not raised. His hands were open, palms forward. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I did private security work before all this. That's not me trying to sound tough. That's me telling you I understand perimeter problems." I almost laughed, but it came out as a dry breath. "I'm not interested," I said. "We're not either," he said. "We want to leave, but we can't leave right now." "Why?" He hesitated. That was a bad sign. "Because the highway's worse than when we came in," he said. "We saw movement behind us, more than before." That tracked. Noise draws things. The caravan had been a loud stone thrown into still water. "How many of you?" I asked. "6, he said. "Me. My sister, Tessa. She's the medic. A woman named Marisol. She drove logistics for a warehouse outfit. A teenager, Nico. A kid, Eli. And the dog." I pictured them again. The medical bag, the reflective vest, the teenager controlling the dog. "What do you want?" I asked. "Guidance," Daniel said, "and time. We'll trade." "Trade what?" I asked, because trades are how you survive without friendships. "Fuel," he said. "Food, tools, whatever you need." I didn't answer immediately because saying yes was dangerous, and saying no was also dangerous. If I turned them away, they'd either leave loudly or they'd try to take shelter somewhere else and make noise again. If I helped them, I risked becoming part of their drama. People bring problems, even good people. But if the highway truly was worse, they might not be able to leave without getting chased, and a chase would cross my territory. So I offered a third option: controlled contact. "Stay in one unit," I said. "Room 15, end of the row near the service alley. Keep the dog quiet, no fires, no lights at night. I don't want you walking the courtyard." "We can do that," Daniel said quickly. "You can't," I corrected. "You will, or you leave." He nodded once, sharp. "Understood." "And if you draw them in again," I added, "I won't open this door." "I get it," he said. I cracked the door a few inches, shotgun held low, not aimed at him but present. I didn't step out, I didn't invite him in. He slid a small bundle forward on the ground. A sealed bottle of electrolyte powder, 2 protein bars, and something that made my stomach tighten with relief, a brand new roll of foil tape. "Air conditioning guy?" he asked, eyes flicking to the tape as if he'd guessed. I didn't answer. He didn't push. "Room 15, I said again. He backed away without turning his back fully and disappeared into the service alley. I closed and braced the door. That was how it started. Not with a handshake, not with trust, but with rules. For the next day, we ran parallel, like 2 animals sharing the same water source without making eye contact. They stayed mostly in room 15, which was good because room 15 was near my hidden route. I could observe without exposing myself. I watched them through cracks and reflections, through the slats of a broken fence, through a gap between a dumpster and the wall. They were disciplined. They moved inside the room more than outside. When they had to step out, they did it in pairs, quick, quiet, scanning angles. The dog only barked once, and the teenager, Nico, corrected it immediately. Not cruel, just firm. In late afternoon, Daniel approached again, alone, careful. "Can we talk face to face?" he asked through the metal. "No," I said. He exhaled. "Fair. We need to leave at first light," he said, "but we need a route. The highway looks bad." I considered. I didn't want to become their navigator, but I had seen the area. I had walked the frontage roads. I had climbed the roof and watched movement patterns. "There's a service road behind the motel," I said. "It runs parallel to the interstate for about a mile, then connects to a gravel access road that goes south. It's rough, but it avoids the main on-ramp." "How rough?" he asked. "Washboards and sand," I said. "If your vehicles are decent, you'll make it." "They are," he said. "We also have one problem." "Of course you do," I said. "The kid's dehydrated," he said. "Not critical yet, but close." That hit hard, because dehydration in the desert isn't drama, it's physics. A child can slide into trouble fast, especially under stress, especially if they've been rationing wrong. "You have water," I said. "We do," he said. "Not enough. We've been stretching it because we thought we'd find a town that still had supply." I thought about my own water stores, my own labels, my own plan. Then I thought about what happens when a group with a dehydrated kid panics. They get loud, they do desperate things, they draw infected, they become a moving hazard. So I made another decision that didn't feel good, but felt necessary. "At dusk," I said, "I'll leave 2 gallons behind the dumpster by the laundry building. You pick it up after dark. Quiet." Daniel's voice softened. "Thank you." "Don't," I said. "This isn't that. This is me keeping you from becoming a problem." "I understand," he said. At dusk, I did exactly what I said. 2 gallons, treated, labeled, placed in shadow. I didn't wait to watch them take it. I went back inside and kept my light low. That night, the infected came closer than they had before. Not because of the water, because the caravan was here and even quiet people make noise. A cough, a whispered argument, a dog shifting on tile, it all adds up. I heard them in the courtyard, shuffling, bumping into patio chairs, tapping against doors. I held my breath and counted minutes by the slow sweep of my headlamp across my bench, red light barely moving. Around midnight, there was a sudden thump against the shack wall. Then another. Then a scraping sound, like fingernails on concrete. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't touch the door. I didn't raise the shotgun. If it was infected, reacting would make sound. The scraping continued, then stopped. A low voice came through the wall, so faint I thought I imagined it. "It's Marisol," the voice said. "Don't open. Just listen." I stayed still. "There are 3 of them by your door," she whispered. "They're following the airflow, your vent." That made sense. Warm air rising, pulling cooler air in. Scent and temperature changes. Something to notice even if you're not thinking. "They're not trying to break in," she whispered. "They're just stuck on it, like moths." I closed my eyes because the idea of infected clustering on my door because of ventilation was the kind of problem you only learn about after you've built the system. "Do you have a way to redirect?" she whispered. I did. I had the ability to change airflow by closing my intake holes, but that would trap heat. I also had foil tape and spare mesh. I didn't want to work on it while they were right there. Marisol continued, voice barely audible. "Daniel wants to help. We can make a distraction. Quiet, not gunfire." I waited fast. If they could peel the infected away without noise, I could adjust my ventilation without them clustering again. I whispered back, the first time I'd spoken to anyone through that wall other than Daniel. "How?" "A bottle," she whispered, "rolling. Not breaking. We'll roll it down the alley. It'll click. Draw them away." "Do it," I whispered. Minutes later, I heard it. A faint plastic rattle, like a bottle cap tapping concrete as it rolled. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. The scraping at my wall stopped. The shuffling moved away, slow, like gravity had shifted. I waited until the sound drifted farther, then moved with controlled speed. I pressed metal covers over my low intake holes from inside, small, sliding plates I'd improvised from a hinge bracket and sheet metal. I didn't seal them fully, just reduce the flow. Then I made a new intake on the opposite wall, higher up, away from the door, using a drilled hole and mesh. It was a compromise. Less draft at the door, less scent funneling toward it, still enough airflow to keep heat from suffocating me. When I finished, sweat ran down my back despite the night cool. I sat on the folding chair and listened until dawn. At first light, the motel looked like a different place. The same faded walls, the same empty pool, but the air had a clean sharpness. The infected were still around, but they drifted farther out, drawn by whatever moved on the highway. I heard the caravan preparing. Quiet, efficient. No slamming doors, no shouting. Daniel had kept his word. I watched from my roof as they loaded their vehicles. Tessa, the medic, moved with calm urgency, checking the kid's face, offering small sips of water, adjusting a cloth around his neck to keep the sun off. Nico kept the dog close, leash short. Marisol checked straps and knots like a person who'd spent years making sure loads didn't kill people. Daniel looked toward the maintenance shack once, a quick glance, like he was acknowledging me without pushing. Then he did something I didn't expect. He walked into the courtyard, slow, controlled, and placed a small item on the ground near the pool gate. Then he backed away. When they finally rolled out, they didn't use the main entrance. They took the service alley route I'd described, vehicles creeping over sand and broken asphalt, tires crunching lightly. As they passed the laundry building, Marisol leaned out of the passenger window and raised 2 fingers. Not a wave, just a sign. Then they were gone. For a long minute, nothing happened. No new infected surged in, no screaming, no engine revving into panic. And then, from the courtyard, I heard shuffling. The small item Daniel had placed began to beep. A phone alarm. An old one, probably set to the loudest vibration and lowest audible chirp possible. Enough to attract infected close, but not enough to broadcast to the highway. The infected drifted toward it, clustering near the pool gate instead of my shack. It was smart, it was controlled. It was the kind of thinking that keeps people alive. I stayed on the roof watching the infected gather, and felt something unfamiliar. Not hope, exactly, but the sense that I wasn't the only person left who could think past the next 5 minutes. That feeling lasted until I looked beyond the motel, toward the highway. A new line of vehicles sat motionless on the shoulder, stretched farther than I could count. Not abandoned in the old way, not scattered. Lined up like traffic had stopped and never started again. And among the vehicles, in the heat haze, movement. Too much movement to be a few infected wandering. It looked like a slow, uneven river of bodies, drifting along the shoulder and between cars, drawn by old noise, old light, old scent. A migrating problem that didn't care about fences or plans. The caravan had escaped just ahead of it. If they'd left an hour later, they might have driven straight into that mass. If I tried to leave now, I'd have to cross it. I climbed down from the roof and went back inside the maintenance shack. I checked my door brace. I checked my water labels. I checked my fuel. Then I sat at my workbench and stared at the foil tape roll Daniel had traded me. In the old world, foil tape was a small thing, a supply item, a line on an invoice. Now it felt like a message. People were still out there, still trading, still thinking, still moving. The question wasn't whether I could survive alone in this shack for a while longer. I probably could. The question was, what happens when the desert stops being empty? because it always does, eventually. And when it does, the maintenance shack would be either a fortress or a trap that I built myself. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.